Hi everybody, this is Mike Reichel. This video is for both of my macro classes and my micro class. Um, Due to the flood, due to misunderstandings, um, people are going to add and drop. If you missed the first class, what we did was we went over, the syllabus. And most of the syllabus is self-explanatory and relatively if you have a question, easy to answer, in a minute or two. What is need what's needed, um extensive explanation, which you missed if you didn't attend, is the grading. um Now, as you can read in the journal, it's journal entries. There, you'll be responsible to compose 50 of them, and they're worth 2 points apiece. That's the simple aspect. Why do I do a journal? Well, after about 11 years of teaching, I've come to realize um, one thing. Many times you'll find that students will begin your class, you have a midterm or a final, and what they do is they kind of coast along, and just before um, the exam, whether it's a midterm or final, they kind of cram and really bust their butt, and they go in and they perform pretty well. They actually perform pretty well. However, a week later, they don't know anything about the topics that were on the exam. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. One, the most obvious reason, is that it's short-term learning. They just more or less put together cognitively the necessary information that is going to be in short-term memory. And the exam, many times, aids, abets, and assists students in that if you're using, say, multiple choice or true and false, those are recognition skills. So what happens is, you know, anyone who's being tested, a student, you know, basically doesn't have to know the material um, extensively well. And what happens is they can do well on a multiple choice um, and true and false exam because it's a recognition skill. You don't have to know the material extensively well where you can verbalize it. You just need to know it well enough where certain terms, you know, trigger your short-term memory, and you answer the question many times, if not most of the time, correctly. Now, another type of exam method is, of course, the essay. Now, the essay um, is a much better, much more effective way of 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 giving an exam, because in order to answer an essay question, it's a recollection skill, meaning you have to know the material somewhat better than you would for a multiple choice exam or a true and false exam, because it really requires you. The answer's not there. Remember, on true and false and on um, multiple choice, the answer is there. So on an essay, it's not there. You have to be able to formulate and answer the question. In essence, explain to the professor your answer to the essay question. A much more effective way of giving an exam. Now, with that said, you might say to yourself, um, why don't I just give a midterm and the final that are essay questions? And I could do that. I could do that. And the reason I veer away from doing that is that outside of college, outside of the academic experience, you generally are not in a situation where you sit in a classroom with a measured time and you perform on an exam. In the business, in the professional world, you have a project, you you have to take the time to do it correctly and methodically. And in short, what I'm saying is, in the business world and the professional world, if you're given a project, you're expected to make the touchdown, the home run, the knockout, whatever it might be. In other words, your performance has to be superior. Now, when you're taking an exam, you may have a bad day, you may have a good day. There's a lot of variances in terms of, you know, what may what may assist you or what may impede you with a timed exam. And if you think about it, where else in life outside of maybe a civil service exam, or if you're going to take the bar exam or the medical boards exam or the pharmacy boards exam, outside of those situations, um, you don't perform under test circumstances. You really don't. And in terms of your college career, I'm sure that you have had, a lot of exposure um, with testing. So I just want to, do something a little bit different. I use the journals, and I use the journals for the very simple reason um, that instead of cramming, it kind of forces the student, or at least nudges the student into weekly performing the compilation and the composing of their journals. Thus, it's one of the last steps in exposure to the concepts. Now, many, if not most, students are going to at least peruse and familiarize themselves with the chapter prior to class. Likewise, you're going to peruse and familiarize yourself with the PowerPoints before class that I send you that are going to be on Canvas. You come to the lecture, I basically, consolidate the most salient aspects of the chapter. My exam is not going to be relative to the chapter, totaling and entirely comprehensive. But my lecture will come from um, the chapter. My lecture will come from that PowerPoints. It's just that we don't cover every nook and cranny. I try to consolidate so that it's a manageable amount of information, the most important information that you should be gleaning from that chapter. I assume that you're going to take notes. And many students print up the PowerPoints and use the PowerPoints and they take notes in accordance with the PowerPoints. I will be using the PowerPoints in class. They'll be on the screen, and you can follow along. You'll have your own set of PowerPoints. Use them, the way you see fit. Um, After class, at some point prior to the next lecture, I would expect you to have reviewed your notes, have reviewed the materials that we went over, if I send you any additional readings. And from that material, I want you to pick four concepts, maybe. You can do five, you can do three. At the end of the semester, ultimately, you have to have 50. Do the arithmetic in terms of the number of lectures that we have. There will be some chapters that you will find more interesting, some chapters will be less interesting. So use your judgment in terms of uh, this is a weekly task. I would never, as a student, go below 3 journal entries per week. I wouldn't go below 3. Um, I would suggest that you minimally do 3, preferably 4, sometimes 5. Because at the end you have to have 50. Now, what you'll be doing with the journal is you'll be, when you pick the concepts, you're going to explain to me in the most straightforward manner the all of the elements, the important necessary elements of that concept. When you're doing this, assume I know nothing about the concept. I know nothing about it. And you have to basically teach me back, explain it to me. Now, prior to composing the journal entry, I would assume that you would familiarize yourself very thoroughly with all of the information that you have about that particular concept. The information that you got from the lecture, the information that you got from the text, the PowerPoints, and you would do a superior job, a superior job. Again, a superior job in explanation would be 2 points, very obviously. Less than a superior job in the explanation would be, less than 2 points. I would give you credit for uh, what you did. If you basically halfway explained it, you would get 1 point. But most people do fairly well with this teaching method. I should say, mm, ultimately grading method, because you're responsible to do this on a weekly basis. And that's how it's supposed to work. It's your text, it's your PowerPoints, it's the lecture, it's reviewing your notes, compiling your journal on a weekly basis. That all should be done prior to the next lecture. So if you look at all the exposures of the material that you've had a lot of exposure. You didn't have to cram. You just have to get the job done, and you have to do a good job in putting concept, the individual concept, each individual concept that you choose, I don't assign. Now, when you're going through the material, each week, I will, I will point out to you this would be a good journal concept to do. You're not required to take my suggestions. I just want to kind of, in the beginning, push the class in the right direction. Now, after, you compile about 10 journal entries, what you should do, you don't have to do it, but I suggest that you do it, is to give me or send me your journal entries and I will go over them. This is a risk-free process. Risk-free. I'm not grading you. Now, if you're, if you're on target, I'm going to let you know. If you're not on target and you're missing something in the explanation, I will point out to you your deficiency. You correct that deficiency, and you're good to go. You're good to go. Now, what happens is this: there will be some students, um, like in my micro class that had me for macro, like they already know this process. You know, there'll probably be fewer micro students um, running their journal entries by me um, during the course of the semester because they already know this process. But for my macro students, don't be intimidated by this. This is all part of the learning process. When you think about it, if you put together 10 journal entries and you have me evaluate them, if you do that 5 times, you got an A. You got an A. You'll know your grade. You can actually calibrate your grade because I will tutor you along the process. Now, admittedly, if you send me um or give me, journal entries, I'm not going to do it like 5 minutes in class. No, you have to give me a day or so to get back to you. But that's really the way I would prefer all students um, to coordinate the class with 10 journal entries whenever you get them, and so that I know, I don't want at the end of the course, somebody that's totally off base. There's no reason for that. That usually doesn't happen, but it has happened. It has happened. So you'll have ample opportunity for me to aid, abet, assist, and tweak your journal entries. And I say in increments of 10 because that gives me a sufficient sampling of your work that I can better evaluate it. If it's 2 or 3, they may be one-offs in either direction, plus or minus. Um, Many students usually what happens is this: many students in the beginning of the semester are pretty diligent in getting me their journals. Halfway through the semester, they they usually they have it. They know exactly what I'm looking for and what my expectations are. Other students are diligent and very cautious. They have me review all of their journal entries, and that's great. So you have options. The option one, you can take your chances and not have my assistance during the semester. You can have my assistance in evaluating all 50 of your journal entries prior to you submitting a final and complete journal. Needless to say, you know what you've done. You've had, the tutoring, um, the assistance in getting this together. Other students, you know, you gauge your own confidence in getting the journal entries together. It's not a difficult task. Now, what I suggest that you do, I sent you in the syllabus package, which we will go over today. If you look at it, I think it's titled either business/economic concepts or journal concepts. It's diamond water paradox, stagflation, and opportunity cost. Um, and I believe that the heading is business/economic concepts for the journal. That's Take a look at that. I'm going to go over these three right now. Also, I sent you separately samples of student journals. Now, I don't expect you to, you know, diligently diligently read every journal entry, but I think it would be worth your while to peruse those student sample journal entries, in that you will see that there is a pretty wide ambit of approach. Meaning, you have your writing style, I have my writing style. My tendency is to, if I'm writing something formally, is is to be overextensive. I give it to my wife, and she'll edit it for me. I take many words to say what can be said in a few words. Other people are more concise. So what I'm saying to you, like, these are not war and peace. If you look at the 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 samples that I gave you in the um, syllabus package, and if you look at the student samples, you'll find some students wrote very, very extensively. Other students covered the same elements, the same important salient elements of the concept in less words. So the approach is really up to you. The only thing that you have to be on target is substantively, you have to know the concept. How you explain it, I want you to explain it in your own words, as straightforward as possible. To me, I'm the student, and you're teaching me. That's the purpose of this journal. As you go on, you will find, if you do this on a weekly basis, at the end of the semester, you're gonna know, pretty much know your grade. You know, you're gonna be done with me, and you can focus on your other classes where you may have, the formal in class exam. It's this isn't studying. This is multiple exposures each week to this material. Now, whether it's macro or micro, you will find that by the end of the course, many of these concepts are interrelated. So it's very important in the beginning to get a good command of the material, whether it's macro or micro, so that you have an understanding of, I guess you could say, the economic perspective, the way an economist views the world, as opposed to how somebody that didn't take macroeconomics or microeconomics views the world. Once you take macroeconomics, because that's the first course, your way of thinking is going to be different once you have completed the course. Once you have completed the course. And that's what we're trying to do here, so that you basically, you can, at the end of the course, you can converse about economic concepts and issues that are in the media every day. You could pick up the Wall Street Journal and probably read most of the articles after macro. After macro and micro, you can read all the articles. After macro, you could probably pick up the business section of the New York Times and be able to read all the articles and understand them. That's our goal here, is to make you a more informed, educated individual, so that you go out into the world. Economics, I don't care what your professional or business endeavor, your career choices may be. Um, Economics affects everyone. So it's an important course. And I also realize one thing. Um, most students, their first exposure to economic concepts is in college, especially in the macro class. Especially in the macro class. It's the first time you're being introduced to concepts. So again, I'm aware of that, and I direct my lectures in a manner where I'm assuming that this is your first exposure. You know, if I'm teaching U.S. History 1 or 2, which I don't teach that at Hudson, but I have taught U.S. History 1 or 2, many, if not most of the students, if not all the students, have been exposed to U.S. history in the setting, primary school setting, and the secondary school setting. So they have a frame of reference. When it comes to macroeconomics, not microeconomics, they've the micro students have already had the exposures. But the macro students have it. It's the very first time. So you're learning something new. So what we try to do is to be thorough in getting these basic concepts thoroughly understood, thoroughly understood. So what I say to you is, relax in this course, learn in this course, try to enjoy the course, and don't worry so much about grades. If you are diligent and you follow my suggestion of doing this weekly, the journal entries, you're going to do fine. You're going to do fine. The person that may be forfeiting a good grade for a mediocre grade, or even worse, um, is the person who basically shrugs off the journal and 2 weeks before it's due is putting together a lot of crap. Believe me, I've been around long enough to know when somebody, when somebody does that. Again, that's up to you. Would you fail the class? Uh, Probably not fail the class, but you most certainly, minimally, will be forfeiting a respectable grade, a very respectable grade, for a very mediocre grade. Um, I would say don't do that. This is something that you should do on a weekly basis. Your job prior to class, familiarize yourself with the text if you have it. If you don't have the text, you can familiarize yourself with the PowerPoints. Insofar as the textbook, you know, you could almost get any macroeconomic textbook, almost any microeconomic textbook. The chapters, the numerical chapters will be different, but the subject matter is really the same. So, you know, I know the question comes up in class, do I have to get the textbook? The answer is I prefer you get a textbook, but you don't have to go to the bookstore and get the brandy spanking new textbook. Some students, you know, really can't afford it. The library has textbooks, macro and micro. There's old textbooks floating around the used textbook market, the same authors, and at one time they didn't bifurcate their text, meaning now we have a textbook for macro and another separate textbook for micro. There's textbooks floating around out there that you could probably pick up very inexpensively that cover both courses, by the same author, by the same author. So yes, it is my preference that you have a textbook, but I will tell you there have been students that didn't have a textbook, used the library textbooks, and did very well in my class. But what they made sure that they focused on was number one, attendance, and number two, the lecture. Remember, I'm not, I'm not gonna, I'm not talking about the Yankees, and then, you know, expecting you to understand the material. I go over the most salient aspects of each chapter. So, if you're an auditory learner, that the lecture is going to be very, very, very productive and very important to you. If you're more of a visual learner and you know, you want to look at the textbook, you want to look at the PowerPoint, you want to take very, very diligent notes. Um, Another thing, and again, I'm not positive about this, but during the shutdown, when we were primarily mostly on remote, the library digitized a lot of text material. So that is an option. You know, check with the librarian. Is this information accessible in a digital form, meaning the text? Used copies, old editions. Believe me, what differentiates one edition from the other is really of no consequence. Is really of no consequence. So you can get older editions. And you have to make those choices yourself. But if push comes to shove and you really can't afford it, remember the library does have textbooks. What I would like to do now is to kind of simulate what we would do in class in terms of a lecture. Now, it's going to come up. I think it's maybe in the second chapter. I have these senior moments, but it's going to come up, and it's the diamond water paradox. What is the diamond water paradox? Well, the diamond water paradox is really just a teaching tool that economics professors use to disabuse students of whatever notions they have about price. Where do prices of products, where do prices of service, how are prices derived? We have all different notions. Is it arbitrary and capricious? Is it, you know, some type of bizarre calculation? It's not. It's not. And the diamond water paradox really focuses on supply and demand. Let's look at water. Now, first, what is the intrinsic value of water? Not the market value, but the intrinsic value of water. The intrinsic value of water is very high. We need it to live. After about 72 hours of not having water, your circulatory system begins to shut down, meaning your blood becomes very viscous. Um, you have almost no plasma because you need water to maintain your blood volume. So after 72 hours, um, you're in trouble. You're on death's doorstep. Like the stairway to heaven. Um, so water can be said to be so intrinsically valuable that It's a matter of life and death. Now, you can agree, and I think you should, that water has a very high intrinsic value. We need it. What is the market value of water? I mean, you could probably go to a 7-Eleven or a delicatessen, and you could buy like a bottle of water for what, like a buck, you know, buck and a quarter. You know, if you're thirsty in class, what would you do? You would exit the class, go out to the water fountain, press the water fountain, and you would have water. If you go to a restaurant, if we can remember, because it's been so long, um, what is one of the first things that the wait staff does? If you don't remember, is that they bring everybody at the table water. Water. Um, I live in Kearney. My household is comprised of my wife, my 10-pound vicious cat, and me. Our water bill is less than $100 a year. So think about, showers and cooking and watering the lawn and a whole plethora of of activities that involve water. I wash my bikes. I use water. And the bill is less than $100. Why is that? Why is it that something that is really the difference between life or death so inexpensive in terms of market value? The reason is simple. The relative supply to the relative demand, the relative supply is copious. Anywhere between two-thirds and three-quarters of the earth is comprised of H2O, water. Now, even water that is, salinated, don't drink salt water. Believe me, it's not fun. You will puke your guts out eventually, and then dehydrate even worse. Um, Water can be desalinated and become potable water that people can drink, use for cooking, use for showering. So, the supply is abundant relative to the demand. So it's that abundance of supply relative to the demand that really sets the market price. And the market price of water is very low. Now, admittedly, let's just say, you know, you know, I'm out hiking in the Mojave Desert and I'm on my second day of no water. And suddenly along comes you on an ATV. And on the back of the ATV, you have this beautiful Coleman water cooler, you know, chock full of ice. And you have all these bottles of Poland Spring. What does that scenario do to the market value of the water? Look at my demand. It changes the price. Suddenly, water is scarce, and the person or persons that have it can set a higher price because it's scarce. I'm in the Mojave Desert, and you're the only source on your ATV of that water. The price changes. It changes because of scarcity. The relative demand to the relative supply does change. But outside of that hypothetical, we have an abundance of water. And notwithstanding the fact that the intrinsic value of water is very high, the market value of water is very low. Now, look at diamonds. What is the intrinsic value of diamonds? Well, they're ornamental. They're sometimes used, I guess you could say, as a status symbol. Um, Cheap, inexpensive diamond flake is used on glass cutters. I worked in a construction supply company as a kid, and you know, my job was to score the glass, cut the glass, and this little tool that you cut the glass with, it's got a little spindle wheel on it. That little spindle wheel is covered with cheap diamond flake, but it does a very good job of cutting it. So outside of the utility of a glass cutter, you have an ornament, you have a status symbol. I would say that the intrinsic value of diamonds is relatively low. I'm 65, I never had a diamond, and to the best of my knowledge, I've not had any deleterious ill effects because of not having a diamond. Now, what is the market value of diamonds? Pretty high, pretty high. Thus, the relative supply of diamonds, say in the world, to the relative demand of diamonds in the world. Diamonds are scarce. You have greater demand than you have supply. It's very labor intensive, you know, getting digging for diamonds in diamond mines. Um, Very laborious. So there's a shortage relative to demand. What does that do to the market price? The market price is high. It's got nothing to do with intrinsic value. It's just got to do with how much supply of a good, a service, or a commodity do you have in the market relative to the demand in the market. That's what sets price. Prices are not arbitrary and capricious. Prices are not a you know, one wing and a prayer or a good guess. Prices reflect relative supply to relative demand. Now, if you look on the sheet, I gave you a suggestion in terms of how I would handle that if I was a student writing a journal entry. You can say There's 3 journal entries on the page. It's not war. I didn't write War and Peace. I just, in a very concise way, explained the most salient, fundamental aspects of what the diamond water paradox is all about. You can even do the diamond water paradox. You have to put it in, don't copy my words. You have to, in your own words, formulate an explanation. It has to come from you, not a glossary, not a textbook, not the notes. It has to come from you digesting all of this information and having a thorough understanding of this information such that you can put pen to paper, really, I guess, to type, not typewriter, to a laptop or whatever, um, and formulate your own explanation. That's what I'm looking for you to do. But you got to remember, attendance in my class is very important because what I cover, I'm giving you the format, the fundamentals. I'm explaining to you what this concept is. If you miss that, you're missing a huge step in this process. So just keep that in mind in terms of attendance. Now, stagflation. What is stagflation? Maybe somebody knows, maybe people don't know. Stagflation is an interesting concept. There's people right now that are, you know, forecasting the potential of stagflation given our recent economic perils. I hope they're wrong, but there was a time, let's say go back to, we'll just hypothetically use the year 1969, where economists thought that there was an absolute unequivocal trade off between unemployment and inflation. Where you had a situation where you had high unemployment, i.e., a recession, um, inflation really wasn't of any concern because the theory was, you have less disposable income. You may very well have a situation of low consumer confidence in the economy. People that are employed are spending less. People that are unemployed are spending less. Thus, demand is down. In short, the theory is that demand in the economy pulls prices up. Now, admittedly, it will only pull prices up to the extent that there's a shortage of supply. Once supply catches up, prices will stabilize, meaning gravitate towards equilibrium. That's called demand pull inflation. So the school of thought was, in the late 60s, that there was only one type of inflation, demand pull. Now, if you had a situation where you had a very robust economy, um, and you had, full employment, um, there's a lot of demand in the economy, it's then and only then it was thought that you would have inflation. In the 70s, we found out that while that is somewhat accurate, it's not entirely accurate. There's another type of inflation. It's called cost push inflation. And this is what had happened. During the 70s, that was a tough decade. Shit. I mean, I lived through it. I mean, I can remember. Um, we were in the midst of, I would say, a pretty nasty recession. Now, at the same time, you could say there was a geopolitical dynamic or political economic dynamic that was taking place. OPEC. If you're not familiar with OPEC, it's OPEC. The acronym is um, for the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. OPEC, in essence, is a cartel. What is a cartel? A cartel is a combination of entities. Now, they could be sole proprietors, they could be subchapter C corporations, subchapter S corporations, or they could be nation states. And generally, you know, given the context of their involvement with each other, normally they would compete with each other. Um, However, when that competition ceases, because they've come to realize that if they collude, work together, they can titrate supply and thus impact price. Now, at the very same time, OPEC, with very strained relations with the United States, implemented an embargo, thus against the United States. Um, and at the same time, cut their production barrels of oil. Thus, when supply goes down and demand is relatively static, price goes up. Now, from our perspective at first glance, we're in the middle of a recession, and, you know, in the context of demand pull inflation, this wasn't of paramount concern. Some economists at the time said, well, if the price of a barrel of oil goes up, the price of a gallon of gasoline goes up, and we might have some trajectory towards inflation in that the transportation costs of raw goods going, being transported to a site is where they're converted into finished goods. And this is a simple hypothetical. Um, and thus the finished goods being transported to market will result in some inflationary pressure. But because the economy really sucked so much that increases in price, and, and I should add this, if you're a supplier, if you're a manufacturer, when the price of transportation costs go up, meaning the price of gasoline goes up, the price of obtaining goods, the price of shipping goods, it goes up. What do as a business entity? More often than not, you roll into the price of your products that overhead. You might, I mean, you might contract your profit margin if your profit margin, could withstand it. But most businesses shift and spread, roll those added transportation costs into good. That would be inflation. Prices would have a tendency to go up. Now, that's not good given the fact that we were in a recession. That's not good. But one of the very important elements that they miss, and they really thought that the potential for any inflation was so de minimis because demand was so low that people just they would substitute or they would forego those products. So they weren't really anticipating any remarkable inflation. But here is where they were short-sighted. If you looked at raw products and finished products, consumer products in the United States, my glasses, my mouse, my bottle of Pepsi, my tape, my watch, any rubber, plastic, formica, leather goods use petroleum products in their processing. In essence, oil is a core ingredient either in the actual product or in the manufacturing of the product. We missed that in the 70s. So what happened, it was ugly. You had people whose disposable income was down substantially, very high unemployment for very long periods of time. And at the very same time, everything, the price of everything was going up. It was going up because either because of additional transportation costs or because the core ingredients in the product, plastic, rubber. If it was in the 1970s, I would be paying more for my Pepsi. Why? This plastic is a petroleum based product. Thus, we realize that there's another type of inflation. And that inflation is cost push. It's much different from demand pull. In a simplified manner, demand pull inflation those higher prices can actually be a stimulant, an incentive for supply to bring more product and service to the market. And again, you'll see prices gravitate towards stability, i.e., equilibrium. Equilibrium, in essence, in short, which we will explain it as we go through the course, it's where supply at a certain quantity and at a certain price structure doesn't have any surplus and there is no shortage. That's what market equilibrium is, in essence. And that's the way, demand pull inflation can be. There's other tools too. There's physical policy that can be used to fight inflation, demand pull inflation, and monetary policy. Um, in short, demand pull inflation is somewhat manageable. Cost push inflation has got nothing to do with demand. It's got nothing to do with demand. For example, let's just say, hypothetically speaking, in Central and South America, there was some type of climatic problem, and the coffee bean crops were wiped out. I have one vice in life. I need 4 shots of espresso in the morning. Got to have it. Can't function without it. Let's say, hypothetically speaking, everybody in the United States is just like me. We need our coffee. And the demand is really the same. But what happened to the supply? The supply was eviscerated. So what supply they have left is a shortage. If demand is relatively the same, but supply has diminished, what can the producers of the supply do? Raise price. That's cost push inflation. It's got to do with some either machination on the supply side, like with OPEC during the 70s, or some reason, and let's say legitimate reason, where there is a shortage of that supply. That's cost push inflation. It's not responsive to, it's not that malleable compared to demand pull inflation. Cost push inflation, can be insidious. It can be. You know, sometimes when we have inflation, it's not so easy to discern whether it actually is cost push or demand pull, because there's a number of variables which we will discuss through the course that are taking place. But eventually we do, we sort out the problem and we find a way to address it. But in essence, during the 1970s, a new term, economics is a dynamic discipline. It's not static. It changes over time. Um, it was dubbed stagflation. And what stagflation means is that you have a stagnated economy that's in recession. And in short, a recession is defined as two consecutive quarters with diminishing growth, meaning we're not producing as many goods and services. Um, we don't want stagflation. I know there's some prognostications, I hope they're wrong. For your sake, my sake, and everybody's sake, I hope they're wrong. But we will talk about it. But we live, and this is not necessarily good. We live in interesting times. Um, we there's enough there's enough, you could say, polarized variables on the demand side and the supply side that admittedly could result in stagflation. You know, you know, we're dealing now with the Delta variant. We're dealing now with mu. You know, and at the same time, we've got all this money in the economy. And inflation, a shortcut definition, is too many dollars chasing too few goods. And what could happen, and let's hope not, there could be some contraction in hiring and employment due to the Delta variant. And now mu, please. This morning I'm watching the news. Oscar De La Hoya he's got COVID. He had the vaccine. He was fully vaccinated. Here's like, a guy that is, a champion athlete in the pinnacle of health, and he's got COVID. So if we're hit again with another shutdown and we've got all this money circulating in the economy, um, it could be problematic. But that's something that we're going to live through, and hopefully by the end of this course, our economy and society will be in a better position. But again, what we're discussing, has is argued, you know, from a few different perspectives. This the issue of inflation, whether it's demand pull or cost push or the potential for stagflation, is taking place in contemporary society. As we speak today, these are the issues that are first and foremost. So you can see, you read how I handled stagflation. I just explained it in its most basic format. The idea is to be comprehensive and, if possible, concise. If your writing style is a little bit more verbose and there's more verbiage, but you've explained the substance, that's fine. That's fine. I'm, I'm not asking you to alter your writing style. Use your writing style. What's important is that you tell me, you teach me the most salient aspects about this concept so that I would understand it if I heard this concept on the news. That's your job. Now, the next one is opportunity cost. Opportunity cost. It exists all the time. It exists all the time. There's always an opportunity cost. Always. If you choose one major that leads to a particular career or profession, there's an opportunity cost that you really are foregoing, maybe something else that you would be interested in doing because your time, your efforts, your money, your motivation is directed in one direction. So opportunity cost is always the next best thing. So what I usually ask students is, you're in class with me. You're in class with me for 2 hours and 45 minutes, 2.5 hours. Do I want to flatter myself and say that this is the number one thing in your life that you want to do is spend uh, 2 hours and 45 minutes with me? I'm so flattered. Really, there are other things in your life that you could be doing. Now, you could be spending time with your loved ones or reading a book or going, those are unquantifiable opportunity costs, but they're opportunity costs nevertheless. But what we like to do, and I guess it's for the sake of simplicity, um, is look for quantifiable opportunity costs. Opportunity cost is unique to the economic perspective. It's how economists calculate. Now, for example, accountants calculate a different way. Let's say you have to take this class in order to graduate, and the class is the only class that's offered. And let's say, hypothetically speaking, you're working. And the class is offered during your work schedule, and you really want to graduate. So you say to your employer, I'm in there's a quagmire. I'm jammed up here. I need this course to graduate, but it's offered at this time, like once a week. And your boss says, look, you're a very good employee. You've been, you're a hard worker. I would happily accommodate you getting your degree, being successful, and it's no problem. The only thing is let your supervisor know when you're coming and going. So let's assume for the purposes of the hypothetical that your course is 3 hours. Wouldn't that be great? Um, and it takes you 1/2 hour from your job site to college, to the classroom. And it takes you 1/2 hour from your classroom to get back to work. And the class meets once a week. So you go to work, it's your regular work week, but on the day of class, you leave and you go to class. Now, of course, you're not getting paid for you're punching out. Your boss is giving you the time off, but it's not PTO, paid time off. Um, And let's just say you make $25 an hour. Now, you've got 4 hours. Half hour going to class, 3 hours in class, half hour going back to work. An accountant, in looking and evaluating what the cost of you taking the course that you're taking, would approach it this way. So we have a vague notion of what opportunity cost is. Let me show you what account cost is. You're taking one course. So an accountant would look at what is your tuition, what is your fees, what is your supply, like what books or supplies do you need that you've purchased. These are outlays of money. Um, if you're using public transportation, what are the cost of public transportation? If you're using a car, how much gasoline are you using? And if you want to really be neurotic, you can even calculate the depreciation of your car on the wear and tear. That's really bizarre, but leave it at cost. Or, for example, if you have to grab lunch on campus or near campus, um, those would be expenditures of money that would be added up. And an accountant would say, this is your cost of going to college. And an economist would say, you're missing something. You're missing the opportunity cost. And in this situation, it's very calculable. You would take everything, all the books, the fees, the transportation costs, you would add them up. But the opportunity cost would also be the 4 hours of work that you're missing. So that's $100 a week. Say the course is 15 weeks. You would add $1,500 onto the cost of your college education, the class that you're taking to get your degree, that particular that particular semester. That is opportunity cost. Now, let's say, hypothetically speaking, you have like Rawlings. Rawlings is a company that makes baseball gloves, baseballs. Um, they also make bats. They make baseball uniforms. I think even now Rawlings makes basketballs. But for the sake of our hypothetical, let's just say Rawlings, um, makes two products: baseball gloves and baseball. And assume that the physical plant is fixed, meaning the factory. Assume that the human resources are fixed, the number of employees they have, and assume that the capital plant, the machinery that's utilized to produce a product, is fixed. You're the production manager. The marketing manager comes to you and says, "Listen, we've done some studies, and there's a very significant indication that there's going to be a very significant uptick in demand for baseballs. So now you know that you have fixed human resources, you know that you have fixed capital plan, and assume that the machinery, in terms of calibrating and changing different apparatuses, the machinery is interchangeable. The machinery can produce baseballs or baseball gloves, but it can only do one of the two. You can't do both at the same time. And assume that you have human resources. Your human resources, you know, they know how to operate the machines when they're making baseball gloves and they're making baseballs. So right now you have to convert capital plant, the machinery. You have less baseball gloves being made. You have less capital plant devoted to baseball gloves and less human resources. You have shifted both capital plant machinery that's interchangeable, that's now going to make baseballs, and you have human resources that are operating and you're making more baseballs. What is the opportunity cost for that business decision? The opportunity cost is the potential, or for that matter, even real, um, the profits that are lost on each baseball glove that could have been manufactured and assumed sold. So in any decision making, there's an opportunity cost. If you're listening to this video, you know, there's an opportunity cost. What is the next best thing that you could be doing? That's the way an economist thinks. An economist looks one step further. Account cost is important, but it's necessary in analysis, but it's not sufficient. There's a next step, and that is the opportunity cost. So, how would you handle that? If you're paying attention to me, and you've taken notes, and you access to some textbook, you have access to your PowerPoints, you would study that, you would basically review that, and then you would formulate in your words, in the most clarifying way, explain to me what opportunity cost is. Please read this sheet that I provided in the syllabus package. Like I said, it will be either titled Business/Economic Concept Journals or Economic Concept. Also, look at the sample journals. All those students got A's. They were like slam dunk A's. So the sampling that you have of student journals um, are all different, all different, but they all got A's because they all were substantively comprehensive. The approach was somewhat different. So I'm not looking for you to change anything about you in your writing style. I'm just looking for a comprehensive explanation in the most straightforward manner possible. So, feel free to read the syllabus. I'm sure you'll have questions um, about other aspects that's on the syllabus. All those can be answered like in 2 minutes. The only thing that really can't be concisely answered is explaining, you know, what I expect on, you know, the the journals, the journal. I expect you to weekly do this. There's a price to be paid at the end. You just put together a lot of slop, and it becomes obvious. Likewise, feel free. Run your journal entries by me. Compile 10, bring them to me, send them to me. I will get back to you in a relatively short period of time, which is probably a day or a day and a half. And I will let you know whether you're on target or there's some deficiency that you should correct. And again, that's risk free. That's risk free. So at the end, when you do formulate your journal, you're going to have corrected your deficiencies, which is a learning process. So there's nothing wrong with having a deficiency. If there is a deficiency, it's a learning experience. So please feel free to tweak me in terms of these journal entries. This is if again, if it's a drop student or somebody derp because of the flood or misunderstanding, um, this is the most important aspect of the class that you missed. Next week, we're going to start chapter 1, and you'll all get the PowerPoints for chapter 1. Um, and that's really about it. That's really about it. Listen, everybody have a very happy Labor Day weekend. Be safe, be healthy. Um, let's hope for the best for this semester. I thought in September everything would just be like going back to school, but you know we've all got our bank robber masks on, but uh, it is what it is. We got to make the best of it. Okay, so again, um, ask questions. Don't be in doubt. I will see you next week on Wednesday, which would be the ITV macro class. On Thursday in North Hudson, which will be the micro class. And on Friday in Journal Square, the macro class. Everybody, be safe. Enjoy your weekend. Bye bye now.